Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. After a quite frankly ridiculous conclusion to the Austrian Grand Prix, Toto Wolff has come out and explained why he lambasted Lewis Hamilton over the radio on lap 52 of the race, telling him to effectively shut up and drive. Hamilton didn't seem so happy about it at the time or after the race. Toto Wolff has now explained why he did it and why he reckons it was in the team's best interest to do so. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. So shortly after I put out yesterday's video, this happened. So Aston Martin decided to protest the results of the race, and it became clear quite quickly this was over track limit violations. We saw Hamilton got a 5-second penalty very early in the race, and you could well imagine there were further track limit breaches after. Many of those drivers already got penalties, which means more penalties should come their way. There were well over 1,200 instances of reported track limit violations. Now, not all of the times someone did leave the track, but there were many lap times deleted during the Grand Prix and afterwards as well. 83 additional lap times were deleted after the Grand Prix ended. Now, to be honest, was it that much different to last year in the way that it was set up? Probably not. They just policed it more severely this year. They had more people to do it, they had more people to look at the cameras, and therefore they found way more violations. The issue is you've got 20 cars going around the track all the time. Tracking these is difficult, and they simply couldn't keep up with the amounts that were being reported during the race, and Aston Martin were clearly noting things down, and after the race they came to the stewards and said, hey, you've missed all of these, time to get your notebook out, right? And it took them a couple of hours, and then eventually they decided that they were going to dish out a load of penalties. The one that I simply can't understand is Esteban Ocon, who actually broke the record yesterday for the most penalties ever received in a Formula 1 Grand Prix, which I believe used to be held by Pastor Maldonado. So unfortunate to Maldonado, he no longer has that record. Ocon has it, because there was all sorts going on, and this, courtesy of the race, are the numbers. So Sainz got a 10-second penalty, Hamilton got a 10-second penalty, that dropped him down behind Russell, Sainz was down to P6, so this cost Ferrari 4 points, I think, right? And Alonso and Stroll gained a couple themselves, so Aston Martin gained a few points here, Ferrari lost a few points. Great result for the Aston Martin, right? Good job for them complaining, I guess, from their perspective. The Mercedes swap around, Gasly is down to 10th here, Albon in 11th anyway, and then beyond that, Esteban Ocon got 2 10-second penalties and 2 5-second penalties for track limits violations. Like, where was this guy off to? How many laps was he actually on the track at this point? De Vries got a couple as well, Tsunoda got an additional one. I mean, an absolute mess. This is completely farcical, and the stewards have said that there needs to be a solution to this in the future, because it's just the way the circuit is designed, especially that turn 10. Downhill, running wide, it feels like it's inevitable, and you can keep it within track limits. If it was raining, as Anthony Davidson said many times throughout the weekends, when it rains, the drivers don't go on the curbs because they're slippery and slow you down. So when they don't want to go on the curbs, they can avoid them. But there's extra lap time to be gained there, so they give it a go. And in previous years, they can kind of get away with it. The stewards last year certainly weren't so on the money as they were this time by noting everything down. So I think the drivers pretty much pushed the limit. And I reckon if they run that race again next weekend, there's way less violations. The drivers know they're going to get caught, and therefore they wouldn't do it. But still, it would happen a lot. It's the nature of the circuit design. Couple of potential solutions, one of which is you put a gravel trap there on the outside of those corners. That would stop it, right? The issue, and the drivers wouldn't run so wide, and they can not run wide if they want to. Yes, it's tricky for the drivers, but if you put a gravel trap there, they won't run wide. So they clearly can do it if they really wanted to as it stands. And the issue with the gravel trap, it's difficult to maintain, and also especially the MotoGP that also races here and plenty of other series, it's probably not ideal. Could they come up with like a circuit-specific exemption? Because before they changed the rules a couple of years ago, they used to do it corner by corner. You know, that kind of turn 4 at Bahrain, right? Used to be able to just run all the way over the curbs there and they didn't care. And then one lap they decided, actually, no, we do care. And now we're going to police it and give you penalties if you exceed it. Qatar, for example, in 2021, people were all over the curbs. It was basically just curb and corner specific, whether you had to go to the white line or whether the curb denoted the exit of the corner. And maybe they could bring that back and say, just for Austria, turn 10, you're allowed to run wide. And then the drivers would be happy about it. And it doesn't seem a complete amateur farce from the fan perspective as well. But is that then creating some inconsistency? Because that's what they wanted to eliminate by making the rule that the white line denotes the track exit or the end of the track everywhere. So it really is an absolute mess. But we've got to talk about other things today. One of which being that we're in another race week, right? Silverstone Grand Prix is this weekend. They're also testing a couple of things. Firstly, they will test out a wet weather wheel arch. Now, this is not necessarily going to be introduced yet, but the idea is they're going to spray a part of the track just wet, like with, sprinklers basically, and see if these work. Putting a wheel cover that you could just snap onto the car if it was to rain and will limit some of the spray. That's the idea, because we've had lots of complications with this. Certainly last year at Suzuka, that was the big one. Lots of spray. Gasly almost ran into a tractor. That was the FIA's fault, and they're trying to prevent this. Now, in my head, it almost feels like, is this not just chucking more concentrated water right back into the face of the driver behind? Maybe so, but maybe this will reduce the spray to some degree. So they're going to try it, and they're going to see if it works, apparently this weekend. The other thing they're introducing are brand new tyres. Pirelli have a new tyre compound they're bringing in, which apparently is going to have a stronger front end. Aston Martin will definitely like this because the rear stability of their car is probably their strongest suit. Ferrari apparently will favour them as well. Mercedes, their front end is actually pretty good. It's the rear end that's an issue for them. So I don't think this will make much difference for them. But also for Max Verstappen as a driver, he loves a very strong front end of a car. And if these tyres make that even better and even stronger, maybe Ferrari and Aston Martin improve, but maybe so does Max Verstappen. So he's still winning by 20 seconds. We'll see what happens in Silverstone, because if he does, he's definitely going to get booed on the podium, right? I think we know that for sure after the events of the last couple of seasons. But speaking of Mercedes, the drivers were pretty at a loss for why they were so slow. Probably it was a setup thing, right? They seemed to get it okay in FP1, but in qualifying and beyond, the car wasn't really there, and especially in the race, it was absolutely nowhere. It looked okay in the sprint, actually, given the starting positions, but the race itself was an absolute disaster. Hamilton was getting deeply frustrated on the radio, potentially because of the track limit violations and the penalty he got, and the penalties that he thought Norris and Perez should get, because he says that Norris went outside the track limits 10 times. Clearly, the stewards didn't see it that way, but I think mainly Hamilton was frustrated because the car was just straight up slow. Like, getting overtaken by a McLaren is just, he must have felt like after overtaking Norris on the first corner that, all right, here we go, I can challenge the Ferraris, see if I can get a podium, just to drop back and lose position on pure pace to a McLaren. He must have been fuming. So much so that Toto Wolff came on the radio to basically tell him to shut up and get on with it, which, he obviously thinks that it was in the best interest of both parties to do so. And I saw an interesting video from Yellowstone here who kind of went through lap by lap what was said on the radio, and apparently after this lap 52 instance, Hamilton didn't really complain again. He basically just shut up about it at this point, because he was constantly on the radio to Bono saying, look, have they not given out those penalties yet? Like, what's going on? And Bono was like, look, they're dishing out the warnings and the penalties. And then Toto comes on the radio and says, Lewis, the car is bad, we know, please just drive it, right? So hit him with the Rihanna shut up and drive, and that's what he did for the rest of the race, and still got a 10-second penalty just to add further, he eventually dropped marginally behind Russell as a result of this, just to, add further insult to injury to what was a terrible day for Mercedes. And as I say, it might have been partly set up. I imagine that's part of it, because every weekend where there's a sprint, usually one team gets it a bit wrong in setup with only one practice session, and they're probably still understanding their upgrades to some degree. And potentially, even I think Andrew Chauvelin said, they haven't really brought much, have they, the last couple of races? Other teams, Aston, Ferrari, they've been bringing new parts every weekend, and Mercedes have not brought something for quite some time. Since Monaco, really. That's all they've done, and now they're bringing a big new upgrade package in Silverstone. So we'll see if that does anything. And Austria has never particularly suited their cars so well compared to some other circuits, such as Silverstone, and we're going there this weekend. But Lewis and Toto respond to this whole situation. Lewis actually puts it on Instagram here. There are days that I can say I'm truly proud of myself, and days like today when the frustration takes over. In a race, it can feel like you're hanging off a cliff and losing the strength to hold on. And then he said something else about, confusing for us to have weird performances, but there's 4 Grand Prix this month, and we've had the first. So there's time for Mercedes to have better results, but that was basically their worst weekend of the entire year, losing so much pace and just finishing so far behind the Red Bulls at the end of the day. So Hamilton was asked about this, like, what made Toto Wolff say what he said? And Hamilton said, I don't know. You will have to ask him. Doesn't sound to me that Hamilton is happy that he was effectively told to stop whining by his boss on the radio for everyone to hear. And it must be said this comes at a rather interesting time when Hamilton and Toto Wolff are, yes, good friends, but they are in the midst of contract negotiations, right, for his future at Mercedes, which you would expect to continue for some time. And after the good result in Spain and after the decent result in Canada, I think there was a lot of expectation that, yeah, Hamilton's going to pick pen to paper, no problem at all. But now all of a sudden, the trajectory's all over the place, and they don't know. Was Spain just a big outlier? Was Canada just the fact that Red Bull were bad that weekend? Because that's what Verstappen said. He was like, yeah, in Canada we were just bad compared to what we normally are. That's why the gap was smaller. Still won by 10 seconds, but he says that Red Bull didn't even do a good job in Canada. So maybe it's just, you know, Mercedes are actually nowhere. And maybe Hamilton will reconsider. And at the same time, Toto Wolff is trying to drive down the price that Hamilton gets paid. Fundamentally, you know, he's probably been told by Mercedes that to try and bring Hamilton's salary down a bit. So, and it comes at a very interesting time in those negotiations. So Toto Wolff comments and replies and says, look, you should hear us talking on the phone and meeting each other. That was nothing. We had a bad weekend, all of us in the team. That makes us stronger. There were even some rumours that Hamilton had refused to attend the post-race debrief because he was just so fuming, apparently. But those are rumours, like, not substantiated at all, pure speculation. Thought I'd mention it anyway, pretty entertaining, and you can imagine a world in which that's the case. It was only for the best interest of the driver and the team. Sometimes there's a certain moment when you need to calm things down, but I meant well. I wanted to make sure we were getting the best out of the package that wasn't performing and trying to give it our best shot. So pretty much saying that he reckons that Hamilton, from what he was hearing and seeing on the radio, was not performing at his maximum level, was getting frustrated, and it was affecting his performance, and therefore he wanted just to get him to focus up and finish the Grand Prix. Maybe because, you know, he was still on the verge of track limits and they wanted to make sure he didn't get any more penalties, which he eventually did. But it also was interesting timing because at that point in the Grand Prix, it was clear what the result was going to be, right? Like, it was going to be 7th, 8th for Hamilton and Russell, either which way this happens. Like, he was never going to be catching Alonso or overtaking him, and he wasn't going to get further up than that. So, you know, it's telling Hamilton this feels a little bit, not exactly unnecessary, but like, they were going to be 7th, 8th anyway. Even if Hamilton was in his own head and was driving a little bit worse than usual, it was still going to be 7th, 8th. So Hamilton not happy about it. Toto Wolff explains his perspective, and now he says that, yeah, very confident they'll get the deal done. They're looking at every single detail, but there's not going to be an announcement to come Silverstone. He also says this isn't a money discussion. It's about future. It's about, you know, beyond topics. So apparently he's not talking about money anymore, at least money in terms of salary, but money in terms of long-term ambassadorial relationship with Mercedes. There's a question as to whether Hamilton feels any different about the situation now, having gone through a very challenging weekend. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Just wanted to mention a quite remarkable statistic. I said in yesterday's video that it was the first time that Ferrari had led 10 laps since Monza 2022. This was actually the first time that any car that isn't a Red Bull had led a lap for more than 10 laps. No non-Red Bull has led more laps in a row since George Russell and the Sao Paulo Grand Prix last year. Right? He led 66 laps there, and Leclerc led 10 laps in the Austrian Grand Prix, and that's the longest streak since Brazil that any car that isn't a Red Bull has led a lap, which is pretty remarkable. And even Max Verstappen, almost like chuckling to himself after the race, says that all the articles and discussions from people that they were closing the gap, he reckons, yeah, that's not the case at all. The Red Bull's gap is still the same, and they are in prime position to win every race this year, as it presently stands. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.